In a world where time is relative and memories are all that remain, there is a truth that always endures. The past never dies. We will discover a story of love and obsession that blurs the boundaries between reality and fantasy, and I'll be there to guide you every step of the way. Due to global warming, many cities on the East Coast have been flooded, leaving people scrambling to find dry land to call home. Unfortunately, land barons have taken over any piece of land they can get their hands on, leaving the city in poverty, with many people living in boats or slum-like areas, some even homeless. But don't worry, because here's where our protagonist, Nick Bannister, played by the charming Hugh Jackman, comes in to save the day. Nick is a former military veteran who runs a business that offers people the opportunity to relive old memories through a unique machine called a reminiscence machine. This machine was once used for police interrogations, but Nick has found a way to use it to help people escape the struggles of their present lives and remember the good times. Nick often narrates the story in the style of old-school noir movies, giving us insight into the world and his own thoughts during the events that unfold. Along with his partner and fellow ex-vet, Emily Watts Sanders, they take appointments with customers, including Nick's old paraplegic veteran buddy Hank, and a recurring customer named Elsa Kareen. Elsa frequently comes to experience a specific memory involving her and an elderly lover, finding comfort in reliving the happy times from her past. Nick received a call from Avery Castillo of the local police, who asked him to investigate Walter Sylvan, a well-known land baron in the area who had a monopoly, even though he was terminally ill. However, Nick was running late for the meeting, and by the time he arrived, they no longer required his services. As Nick was leaving, he overheard Walter asking his son if he had found her yet, but the son replied in the negative. Sometime later, a charming and mysterious woman named May arrived at Nick's office just before closing time, seeking his help in locating her missing keys. Nick agreed to help, and was struck by May's beautiful singing voice when she sang a song his grandfather used to sing before he passed away. He was entranced by her, and they ended up meeting again at one of her gigs, where they fell in love. Months later, May disappeared, and Nick was desperately trying to recall where she might have gone. His friend Watts expressed concern about Nick's obsessive quest to find May, but Nick refused to give up. After all, people don't just vanish into thin air, right? Nick is called in to investigate the memories of Fawkes, a former enforcer for a notorious crime lord known as St. Joe. As he watches the memories, he notes May with Joe and convinces Fawkes to recall more times he had seen May. Finally, they come across a memory where May steals a substantial amount of balka, a potent drug, from Joe while he's away and attacks Fawkes when caught. This discovery leads Nick to question how well he knew May, and he decides to head to New Orleans alone to confront St. Joe. Upon arrival, Nick initially pretends to be a junkie in order to gain access to Joe's headquarters, but the facade is short-lived as Joe sees through it. Nick then confronts Joe directly about May, but Joe claims he hasn't seen her in a long time. In an attempt to get rid of Nick, Joe orders his men to drown him in an eel tank, but fortunately Watts arrives just in time to save him. The gunfight ends with Joe being fatally wounded, Nick being rescued from the tank, and Joe's men dead. In his final moments, Joe pleads with Watts to end his suffering, and Watts obliges before bringing Nick back home. Later, after delving deeper into memories of himself and May, Nick makes a startling discovery. It turns out that May had broken into his vault of memory recordings and stolen some belonging to Elsa. Nick also learns that May is working with the corrupt cop they had encountered earlier. To make matters worse, Nick realizes he is now known as Cyrus Booth, one of Joe's enforcers. Meanwhile, tensions in the city are rising as the public becomes outraged that Walter Sylvan's land monopoly is still standing. An annoyed Watts informs Nick that Walter has passed away, but Nick's attention is suddenly drawn to Sebastian and his mother, Swati, as they leave the scene. In a sudden epiphany, Nick rushes back to the office. There, he uses his memory of watching Elsa's earlier recording to replace the stolen memory and compares it to one Swati had viewed years ago. The shocking truth is revealed. Walter had an affair with Elsa years ago, and she gave birth to his son. Realizing that Elsa and her son are in danger, Nick is determined to find and protect them. However, a fed-up Watts tries to convince him to take the evidence to the police instead. This leads to a heated argument, with Nick accusing Watts of working for him to escape her past. In the end, Nick fires Watts and arranges for her to work with Avery, causing her to leave in disgust. Now alone in his quest for the truth, Nick sets out to find Elsa and her son. Nick arrived at Sylvan Manor seeking answers from Swati about Walter's affair. In a reenactment of a memory that Nick had on file, Swati revealed that Elsa was one of several women that Walter had affairs with. However, before they could continue their conversation, Sebastian interrupted them. He had Nick escorted out and ordered him to be killed. Fortunately, one of the bodyguards recognized Nick as a former military vet and spared his life. Nick was warned that if he returned, he wouldn't be so lucky. Determined to track down Elsa, Nick encountered a resident girl who knew her and learned that she had been killed, and her son Freddie had been kidnapped and presumably killed by a woman who Nick deduced was May. Despite this setback, Nick continued to pursue Elsa and was confronted by Cyrus, who now had heavy scars compared to his earlier appearance. Cyrus warned Nick to get off May's trail and called someone to inform them that Nick would no longer be a problem. Despite the warning, Nick continued to pursue Cyrus to an abandoned trash factory full of homeless people. Nick confronted Cyrus about May, and Cyrus goaded him into trying to kill him. Despite nearly drowning at one point, Nick eventually sneaked up on Cyrus and knocked him out with a sedative. After capturing Cyrus, Nick took him to his office to interrogate him using the reminiscence machine. During the interrogation, Cyrus revealed that he blackmailed May into working for him. May and Cyrus were once partners working for St. Joe, but May left to lead an honest life. Cyrus then used May to deceive Nick into a relationship, using information from Hank to break into Nick's vault and steal Elsa's memory recordings. After tracking down Elsa and Freddie, Cyrus killed Elsa, and May saved Freddie before Cyrus could harm him. Cyrus resorts to drugging May in an attempt to discover the whereabouts of Freddie. However, May leaves a message for Nick in an indirect way and takes her own life. Nick is devastated and uses the reminiscence machine to electrically lobotomize Cyrus. Nick then discovers that Sebastian was the true mastermind behind everything, ordering Cyrus to kill Elsa and Freddie to protect his inheritance. Freddie is alive and safe, rescued by the police on a tip from Nick. Nick reconciles with Watts and confesses to frying Cyrus's brain intentionally, a crime punishable by a prison sentence. However, Nick urges Watts to tell Avery and the police everything, and he explains the whole story to her off-screen. After some time, Nick is seen walking back to his office amidst riots and chaos in Miami. He narrates how the information he provided to the police broke the Sylvan family's monopoly over the town's land, which would likely result in Sebastian's imprisonment. Nick hints that he served only a short jail sentence for what he did to Cyrus, and possibly just got out during this scene. He enters the reminiscence machine in his office to relive his memories with May once again. Jumping ahead many years later, an elderly Nick is still inside the machine, and an elderly Watts is watching over him. Watts's granddaughter asks why she takes care of Nick, and she responds that both Nick and she made their own choices a long time ago. As they exit the room, Nick is seen in his tank remembering when he told May the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, but with a happy ending. The scene cuts back and forth to this memory with Nick smiling contentedly.